Welcome to Macquarie Business School's Dean's Distinguished Lecturer Series. My name's Eric Knight. I am the Executive Dean of Macquarie Business School, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here today this morning to hear from two of our most distinguished alumni about the future of big data in a world reshaped by the pandemic. Now, if we were doing this in normal times, we'd be meeting on our campus out at Macquarie University, the land of the Wadawurrung clan of the Darug Nation. But I appreciate that that's not the time we live in at the moment. And so welcome from wherever you are dialing in. The way that we'll run this session today is thank you for the many of you who have sent questions through. We've received all of those really fantastic questions. And just given the digital constraints, I have pulled those various questions together into what will be hopefully a free flowing conversation over the next hour or so, and I'll reference those questions as we get to them, so that each of you have a chance to listen to the kind of reflected expertise of Adam and Kristie, respectively, on this important topic. Let me just introduce our two guests today. We have Kristie Atkins, Managing Partner of Wink, a dynamic business growth and commercial leader. Kristie is Managing Partner of Wink, a specialist consumer acquisition and retention business. Her previous roles include Managing Director in the renowned marketing solutions business Edge, which is now owned by Blackhawk Network, Chief Operating Officer of WavePay, and Chief Commercial Officer of marketing service giants Avato. Wink is a sales and marketing strategy company responsible for acquisition and retention, marketing, traffic and spend driving in a number of big retail and corporate brands. So Kristie, thank you for joining us. And of course, you are an alumna of the MGSM MBA program. So
yes, I am. So thanks so much for having me, Eric. I'm a, how would you describe it? A non-finance manager or finance for non-finance manager person, which I've learned with MGSM as we go. So it's probably something for today that's a bit special for me as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, welcome. And our other alumnus today is Adam Driussi. Adam Driussi is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Quantium, widely regarded as Australia's leading data science and artificial intelligence firm. Established in 2002, Quantium now has 800 staff, working with many of the world's leading brands to power new business possibilities via data, analytics, and technology. Quantium recruits many of the brightest minds in data science and technology from within Australia and across the globe. And in 2013, Adam was awarded Actuary of the Year by the Actuaries Institute in Australia for his work in data analytics. And Adam, I know you are also one of our alumni of Bachelor of Economics and Bachelor of Actuarial Sciences. So thank you very much and welcome.
No problems. And thanks for having me as well, Eric. It's been a while since I've been out at Macquarie Uni, so it's a shame we can't do that in person, but yeah, nice to be here virtually at least.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we'll have you on campus one day. So look, I think maybe the place to start today's conversation is with a little bit of your personal story and a little bit about what inspired each of you into this space. You know, I suppose, Adam, in your case, founding and setting up Quantium. Kristie, in your case, enter into data analytics and rising up into Wink. Maybe I'll give you a chance each to give a little bit of your background and your sort of story to the current position that you currently hold. Adam, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I'll try and keep it brief. So as you mentioned a moment ago, I was a graduate at Macquarie. I did actuarial studies there. So I started working as a young actuary at a consulting firm, in particular in the general insurance space. So I started getting into using data and analytics as an actuary to help support insurers make better decisions, and quickly started enjoying insurance pricing work where you were using data to help insurers work out which customers to target to have a more profitable portfolio and all that sort of stuff. And I enjoyed that a lot more than the other sort of work we were doing in actuarial. And in particular, because it was using data to drive strategy and to drive future growth. And I guess having done that for a number of years, I worked in that space for about 8 years. We looked at it and I started working with my now co-founder at Quantium, a guy named Greg Schneider, and he in particular had the vision of why we should be doing this in other industries. And it was back then, this is 19 years ago. 19 years ago, companies weren't really using data anything like what they are today. It was really insurance companies and banks were largely using the data, and everyone else was starting to build up these data assets in a post-internet world, but weren't using them as much. And we thought, well, why should it just be insurers using their data to kind of create customer value? Everyone should be understanding their customers better and using data to make better pricing decisions, targeting decisions, whatever it might be. Now, so we started Quantium on that basis. We started pitching out to companies saying, listen, we're a couple of actuaries. We think we can do things with your data. And it was really a novelty for some businesses to meet with us to hear our ideas. Whereas you fast forward, 20 years, and now every company's got a data strategy, large data science teams and so on. So it's come a long way. But that was just the thinking, was we've got these skills and so on that we're applying in the insurance industry. Why doesn't every other industry need the same thing?
I think we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that. Kristie, do you want to say a little bit about how you entered the data world and your journey into this space?
Yeah, well, I guess my career background is rather diverse and unique. I actually started my working career post my study as a journo, but actually I think the characteristics of a journalist are about gathering information, asking questions, being inquisitive, looking for data, stories, ideas that'll inform the way in which you're going to, uncover news and tell the news. And I think then that was a foundation for me to move into sort of a commercial business career, which is, a lot of people on paper would say I've sort of become a salesperson, which is kind of weird. But actually, I think these days that the foundation of business and sales into organizations, which, it's the lifeblood of any organization, that really decisions these days, buying decisions are made based on sort of data and insights. And, big data is fantastic, but it's more important that you've got the right insights that you can draw from that data. People these days really are choosing what they're going to buy and how they're going to buy it, based on a journey they're taken on, based on messages that are put in front of them, and that doesn't matter whether or not you're just sort of doing B2B or B2C. I think these days, I run a customer acquisition and retention business, called Wink. And really, we utilize data in helping our clients make decisions about what sort of activity will drive the customer behavior and outcomes that they want. A lot of the time marketing over history has been about, fluffy promotions, and it's kind of had a bad name, but that really has changed. People are making decisions based on the numbers they see. And I think for me, so therefore I take a really commercial view of this space. But it's interesting, a lot of people, when they talk about it, they say, oh, my problem is that I'm wading through masses of information, and, I've got all this data, and I've got spreadsheets, and I've got CRMs, and I've got all this stuff. What are these numbers telling me? And for me, it's all about starting with a question of, what is it that you want to know, which is what a journalist is really looking for. What is it you want to know? And then let's find the numbers or get the insights out of the data that backs up those, or gives you the answers to those questions that you're wanting to answer.
Fantastic. So maybe just to kind of reflect a little bit in terms of your current businesses and also the clients that you're serving. Obviously it's been a pretty interesting last 18 months here and around the world. We've all moved into a digital life. Can you say something a bit about where data-led businesses in your own business are right now in terms of what trends have accelerated, where have particular themes kind of been amplified, just to give a bit of an orientation of where the market is at the moment? Yeah.
Okay, I'm happy to start. Look, I think you might have heard things like, the pandemic has forced companies to accelerate their digital ambitions and those sorts of things. I think that's absolutely true. So what we found at the very start of the pandemic, I had a lot of people saying to me, geez, you're going to have to be careful because clients are going to have to stop spending money. You have to really think carefully about your team structure, all this sort of stuff. We found the opposite. I think we sold more work in the first 6 weeks of the pandemic than any 6-week period in our history. We sold a lot of projects that companies have been sitting on for maybe even 12 months deciding, do I do this or not? All of a sudden they said, we need to do this now because we need to be more customer driven. And there's certain industries where that's more so than others. So say, for example, the retail sector, a business like Woolworths and every other retailer globally, frankly, has had to really accelerate their digital journeys. The percentage of customers that are buying products online has just gone through the roof. They are hitting numbers that were in their ambitious 5-year plans they hit within 6 months. So because of that, the need for those sorts of companies to adapt to the way that they they deal with all these e-commerce volumes and everything. It's not just a case of sorting out the trucks, that's a big one, but it's also things like how do you get your supply chain better? How do you get basically all of your customer and data analytics in the background better as well? So I think the big result of all of that is that there's been a massive explosion in the demand for data science and engineering resources from pretty much globally. And so where that kind of wreaks havoc for companies is that a lot of companies are desperately trying to hire these resources and can't find them. And those, when you do have those people, you're now getting higher attrition. And so it's really hard to recruit and retain kind of these critical resources, whether you are a big bank or a big retailer, or frankly in Quantium, you know, we're all in the same environment. And then you add to that borders being closed and it becomes tougher to get talent from overseas. It's a real that's probably the lasting trend of it, is all of the acceleration now means that the demand for these types of people is ahead of the supply.
Hopefully, some of our actuary students are hearing that and looking hopeful at what they're going to do. Economic students, Kristie, do you want to say a little bit from your perspective? You know, where are we at in terms of your customers, your clients, and also this particular space?
100% on what Adam said. You know, demand is absolutely at peak for services of organisations, you know, like ours. But I think also what we're seeing is that while a lot of organisations have been on quick, you know, let's call them digital transformation journeys, a lot of them are also battling to do that in an environment where they've got legacy systems, they've got people who aren't used to working sort of in an agile way, and so are trying to find workarounds for things. So I think, you know, one thing that is important for as a skill for, you know, people working in organisations like ours, as well as creative problem solving, or, you know, scenario planning around other ways to do things. You know, it's great if you've got the most beautiful system that's spitting out all the numbers you need, but it's kind of not reality as well for a lot of organisations. We're also generally seeing a huge focus on people, and particularly sort of in retail, property, and maybe utilities and insurances, wanting to build a much stronger direct relationship with their end customers, and utilising, you know, information they have at their disposal about, you know, the history they've had with customers to do that, or using new technologies to actually develop and data and insights to develop a connection with their end customers. So for example, you know, we all know retail is battling. Retailers have been really good at running out loyalty initiatives or loyalty programs to get a relationship with their end customer. But we have clients that are shopping centre companies. They never own the end customer. You know, at the moment, they're like, no one wants to pay their rent. Retailers are closing. We don't own the customer. So there's some shopping centre groups in particular that are doing some quite, you know, impressive activity, or developing out ways in which they can start to have a relationship with their end customer. And I know in some of the questions, Eric, that have been provided for today, that there's been a lot of things raised about loyalty, and there's lots of talk about, you know, customer insights and loyalty and how they intersect. For us, I've never seen in my career a demand for people, you know, at a board level or in the C-suite saying, oh my God, we need a loyalty program. COVID means you need a loyalty program. And I think all of that sort of thing has to start with, well, what is your loyalty problem? And do you actually need, you know, better information about what your customers do, and utilize that to develop out specific activities or campaigns or tactics, rather than going, I need a full-blown loyalty program. Some people do, but not everybody.
Yeah, so just building on that, and Adam, maybe you want to comment on this particular point. I suppose it's coming to this nature of data as one piece, but data saturation or tolerance from the kind of customer side. And just to read out one of the questions from our registrants, you know, just to pull out what Kristie just said here. It says, these days, every time I make a transaction at a different retailer, I find that they are increasingly asking me to sign up with their reward program. I often find myself declining, as the idea of signing up for that many loyalty programs is simply overwhelming to me. And I'm not sure if others feel the same way. Can you speak a little bit about how the proliferation of loyalty programs has affected average B2C relationships? Are they increasing sales, or is there another source of consumer data collection? I mean, I think I'm a member of the Woolworths loyalty program, but can you say a little bit about, you know, at what point does this tap out? You know, where's saturation? You know, when do we? Can you say a bit about this?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure, but I agree. Look, as a consumer myself, I agree. I don't sign up to all of these different loyalty programs because there's just too many. I think, to me, the trade-off needs to be that for me, a loyalty program to be successful, you need to have a brand that you kind of regularly interact with. So, a Woolworths or a Coles are great examples because you're at the shops, on average more than once a week. But there also needs to be some reward as well. You actually need to feel like you're getting something back from the participant. And so there's certain, I feel like for a lot of programs, I think the only thing you feel like you're going to get back is probably some email spam, because you probably, I'm not going to mention any brands, but say a particular retailer that you might go to once every 6 months, you're just not going there regularly enough to then think, I want that spam. So I think the customer value proposition probably isn't strong enough for many programs, but then you've got some really great programs, whether it's Woolies, whether it's Flybuys, whether it's Qantas, Frequent Flyer, those sorts of brands where you kind of got this mix of regular interactions. I think Qantas has done a great job of building out a aspiration. People want the points because they want to see that holiday, whatever it might be. But there are many other ways that I think customers or retailers can understand their customers better without having to bombard people with email spam. And certainly, I don't think a loyalty program is just about saying, I just want to get people's email addresses to start spamming them with emails. It should be about, I want to understand my customers better to be able to use that customer data to deliver a better proposition for customers, full stop.
So building on this a little bit, I suppose, on that theme of trust and relationship, one of the cross-cutting themes that has come across, I suppose, as the data world has blossomed, is this issue of security and how do you kind of deal with data assets in a secure fashion. I've got a question here, and sort of just to open that up. It says here, as technology has become ever more integrated into our lives and technological advancements change the world for good, how do we protect ourselves and our online data from hackers, agencies, and governments that may have dishonest motivations for this information? Kristie, do you mind saying something about this? Because I appreciate there are all kinds of new regulations that are coming out, GDPR and others, that have tried to kind of provide some, certainty and clarity around data privacy. But clearly, this is part of our future. How does a consumer and how do firms begin to think about security of data and those kinds of issues?
Well, I think the thing that would be most interesting is that now more so than ever, virtually the first time you speak to a client and you're talking about any kind of activity, they say, where is the data being held? Number one. And at the moment, if your answer isn't onshore, pretty much that's the end of a very short conversation. There's very little wish at the moment for people to hold data offshore, more so than I think we've seen before. They also want to know a lot of the time now exactly who's holding it and where and how and all the rest of it, including, names and everything. It's in terms of the legislation, I think one of the things that's most difficult is that a lot of the time now it's almost different by industry as well. Some of the industries in which we work have their own set of requirements. It's not even just generally about privacy law or anything like that. So it's a complex universe. You've got to keep your fingers on the pulse. And you've got to have people that are, you're working with that you can trust to provide the right advice, because things are changing all the time.
Adam, do you have any comments or thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I think all of that, we see exactly the same trends as Kristie. I think the other thing is just on cybersecurity more broadly. I think, it was a number of years ago now that I think cybercrime overtook physical crime in terms of total world crime. So there is a huge amount of cybercrime. So I think it's if you're in denial about that, I would be very careful about how you take care of your own affairs, let alone a company. So things like your passwords and stuff. There's nothing. I had an incident at work as an example. I received an email saying you've attempted to log into one of a Quantium product, and so I said to our head of product, I haven't tried to log into the product. So the team came back and said, oh well, here's what it was. Someone used your email address, and this is the password they used to log in. They couldn't get in, but this is the password they used, and it was a password that I had used regularly on lots of other sites. So if we look into it, turns out my email address and password that I use for lots of different things was available for sale in a database on the dark web. Wow. So it's when you hear that moment is the day that you suddenly go through and change your passwords on every single site to be full security and so on. And so that's a personal example. And we see companies having to spend a fortune on cybersecurity. And that's on top of the likes of Google and Microsoft and so on, who provide, GCP and Azure, and Amazon with AWS. They have enormous security teams trying to protect their data. But as much as anything, there's all of that cybersecurity stuff where you can spend as much money as possible. The other one is you need to have a culture of people understanding and recognizing that this is prevalent. And so anytime you get an email from someone asking them to do something, assume it's fraud, and you need foolproof ways of being able to double check. Because our finance team would get emails every day from me, even though it's not me, asking for an invoice to be approved, as an example, or paid.
Yeah.
That happens every day.
Yeah. So, Adam, just on that particular point, just to kind of make that a concrete recommendation, I mean, what does that mean for ordinary, Joes like, us, in terms of, password hygiene? I mean, are you expected and should you be changing your password every 3 months, or how do you begin to battle these unknown, invisible kind of hackers?
My simple tip. So I asked the same question of our IT kind of super geeks to say, look, what should I do? And the trade-off I took is I ended up using a product called LastPass, where basically LastPass is a vault which stores every website that I log into with my username and password. And I went through and I spent about 2 days, and it's a painful 2 days, but once you've done it, it's great. 2 days redoing the password for every site that I use, and basically getting it to randomly come up with the password. So I don't even know the passwords of sites that I use, but they're all stored in that vault. And it's very easy, actually. Essentially, just use my Face ID. Then when I go to log into the site, it then goes into that vault, pulls out the right password, and I can log in. But no site would then have the same password and so on. So I'd highly recommend you use something like that to control your passwords.
One thing also, Eric, I think is going to be really interesting going forward in this country is about prosecution around people that are doing the wrong thing, because had a number of examples where I've had, matters in front of the sort of cybercrime squad that the police have, incidents related to fraud, not necessarily in the organisation I'm working in now, but in previous ones, and trying to get matters dealt with quickly is near impossible. Talking about small numbers of people that are working in those kind of spaces, there are masses of cases and matters that are sitting, that require time, and just getting up the list, you'd have to be one of the biggest issues that gets uncovered. And at the same time, it's interesting trying to get insurance claims through around cyber issues as well. I don't know whether or not, many people have had experience with that, but there's so many different ways that insurance works in those spaces these days. You've got to have it, but getting a claim through is also really interesting. So you need to protect yourself from the beginning of the process.
Just kind of running on this a little bit, and I was going to pull up a question here that I was going to ask a little bit later, but it seems the right point to ask it. I mean, what does this mean in terms of, how we begin to work at the intersection of data sets, or data sets that might sit in different organizations? We had a Dean's Lecture Series a bit earlier this week with Michael Miller, who's at the exec chair of News Corp, and he was explaining how he's created an aggregated media ecosystem that brings, Fox Sports and News Corp and News Life Media together. And from their perspective, because it's all within the house of News Corp, it's a single point of authentication and one entry point into a kind of, a walled garden of opportunity. I suppose when you're moving into the world of, collaboration or cross-section, Qantas with Woolworths, or other things like that, how do you begin to do meaningful cross-company collaboration, given the kind of data integrity issues you just surfaced?
I think there's a number of things you need to think about. I mean, again, without boring you with all the details, I think the first thing is you need to have transparent relationship with your customers and be clear around what you are and aren't doing with their data. So I think, we're very fortunate to work with big brands. None of them do things that you'd call cowboy-like with their data. And so that starts with having open and transparent relationships with customers around what you're doing. Secondly, you're right. Increasingly, companies are very protective about their data leaving their environment. So I can tell you within Quantium, often when we're working with our clients, we're actually working on their systems because they don't want their data to leave their own environments. And so if you did have companies who were finding some way of saying, okay, we want to collaborate better, we have our customers' permission to do the right thing, and we do want to share data, it would always still be at a anonymized version and so on. You wouldn't be sharing personal details and so on. You'd be very, very careful around that. Now, in the advertising world, there's probably a bit more that gets done. Companies might be thinking about how can I advertise to certain customers on Facebook and so on, and Facebook might have different things that they do. But when you're talking about two corporates partnering on something, I think it tends to be done very, very carefully, I would say.
Kristie, do you want to say something at this point?
Yeah, I think, the way you tokenize people in campaigns and whatever, really important. We got a big rise in demand in this country for sort of advocacy marketing programs, or these refer a friend type initiatives that you see sort of more so in retail and also in sort of utilities. And, the way that all of a sudden I want to invite Adam to really take advantage of a special deal, and the way I follow him through that process, you have to deal with those kind of things really carefully. So we sort of, as Adam said, anonymize people, tokenize people, ask that they actually, input their own details and sort of start afresh with who they are and what they're doing for that purpose. But yeah, definitely proceed with caution.
I thought I might sort of change gears at this point and, tackle a range of questions that a number of people have dialed in just about leadership and the leadership of organisations that you lead. I mean, this is clearly a pretty fast-moving space, and the future is evolving as we speak. Can you say a little bit about your leadership journey and experience around how you built this capability within your respective organisations and the strategies that you undertook in order to both kind of find that balance between repeat and consistency, repeat work, but also kind of trying to understand the kind of slipstreams of change that might upend things in different ways? I mean, I want to ask you each, so feel free who wants to go first.
What do you got, Kristie? I've gone first.
No worries. Look, I think that it's really interesting that these days it feels like you need to know a little bit about a lot more things than you ever did previously, and that's generally as a leader. And I think, as a leader, it's becoming more and more important that you can understand where your own personal weaknesses potentially lie, or where your skills aren't necessarily at the same level as other people, and that you really also need to resource, a team that is going to be able to supplement your own strengths and weaknesses. You kind of got to be honest with yourself. I think also that what we're finding is that investing in skilled and experienced people to guide others and to guide clients is really important. I mean, as you identified, there's so many things that, need to be thought through. You need people with fingers on the pulse. You need people that have got real world experience and can explain what can happen in certain scenarios if things go wrong with credibility to customers. And I think it's also important that you can develop out a culture in your organization where you've got those leaders that have not only got that skill, but can freely share it with, the up and comers, in order that they can sort of gather the knowledge and the experience as they roll through their own careers.
Okay, I'll jump in. So, look, I think again, I agree with all that. Maybe just a few lessons from my own leadership journey. I guess one thing is that in my case, Quantium has grown over the years from, I think we had 8 people on day one to, over 800 today. So for me personally, my leadership style and my role in the company's had to change a lot over that time. Kind of constantly changing. And in particular, it almost goes from, I remember someone using analogy once, like a sporting analogy. You need to go from being a great player on the field to being the coach off the field, kind of helping guide the players with the strategy of what they're doing and letting them play. And I think that's true. And it's not an easy transition to make either, by the way. It's not easy to go from, in my case, I'm an actuary, but to be honest, I haven't touched a thing that looks anything like being an actuary in 15 years. People would laugh at me in terms of my actual quantitative kind of capabilities these days. But that's all about then trying to lead a group of people who can do that work and create the right environment for them. So for me, the things that are important, it's about being authentic. So I'm very honest with the team. I don't bullshit. I don't pretend I'm anyone other than, if I get asked a question, I give a very straight answer. Sometimes people might not like the answer, but I think people respect that they know there's not other things going on. I'm very transparent. So they're things that are very important to me. And I think it's also, there's leadership means different things to different people. So, I've realized over the years that you need to repeat messages a lot. You kind of can't assume that just because you understand something that everyone does. You need to kind of constantly kind of repeat the strategy, repeat the vision, and make sure people understand why they are doing what they're doing and why their role matters and the role they can play. I think you need to have compassion, but at the same time, you can't be afraid to give people feedback, because if you don't give people feedback, then they can't get better at what they do. And part of your role as a leader is, in many ways, to coach talent to become better. And that means giving them feedback as to what they can do better. And then the last one, I guess, that comes to mind is increasingly, I think when you lead a team of people, in particular young people, you need to actually not be afraid to give your views on important social matters. And so, things like coming out in support of things like marriage equality and these sorts of things. Many years ago, companies didn't actually take a point of view on these topics. And whereas I've found, we take a point of view on progressive topics to say, yes, we support that. And yes, we support this because we support everyone in our team. And again, I think you realize when you do that, that sometimes the minority of people that's important to them, how much it means to them is very empowering. So that's the other thing that I think has changed a bit over the years, how important that is in leadership as well.
Nice message on Are You OK Day, really?
Yeah, like I said, we're holding a big thing this afternoon and we've got health and wellbeing groups within the business, because mental health is a huge issue in the workplace. It is by far our biggest occupational health and safety issue is mental health. We don't have people slipping and falling and hurting themselves at a construction site, but we have a lot of people with pretty serious mental health considerations.
Yeah, and more so now than ever, because people are working, so often in situations like we all are, where we haven't been out of our houses for 12 weeks, or if you're a Melburnian, 270 days or something. It's kind of like that these days. It's no longer a case of just people can't be treated as employees. People are people, and sometimes actually you've got to set the work aside and have a conversation about real life. Honesty is often the best policy. And I think what is nice is a bit of a culture that was emerging of the way in which people are promoted has kind of also changed. I think there was a real, there's always been a lot of the whole best person at the job becomes a manager. And the reality is often the best person at a job is a horrible manager. Sometimes they need to be left to be the best person at the job and be really, really good at it. Leaders often have entirely different kinds of traits. So they should be appointed for those, not just because, wow, they're really good at what they do on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely.
Extending on this a little bit and going to the point of journey, a number of the questions that were sent through were about the kind of threshold moments or the moments when you realize that you were in one direction and then you had to change. Now, implicit in that might be size, going from 8 to 800, but part of that also might be based on, strategy, moving into different areas, going global versus local. I just wondered if you, and also more broadly, how you sense a change in climate or culture. I just wondered if you could say a little bit about your radar for kind of threshold level changes, that both outward but also in self, like of yourself. How do you register that point of difference and then react to it?
I've had a couple of key personal moments in my life that I don't know how much they'll resonate with other people, but they've been where I've wanted to make a step change in my career. And it's interesting that often your gut tells you when they're coming and then you've just got to be, game enough to make the change. I had a great first sort of 7 or 8 years working in commercial radio, loved it, moved in, and after that had 12 and a half years, including up to sort of a group director level with event hospitality and entertainment. Most fun I've ever had, best job in the universe. Yes, you work absolutely crazy, but you meet famous people, you get to go to every event in town and you never pay for it. You've got so many red carpet dresses in your cupboard, you don't really know what to do with them all that kind of stuff. But at some point I was like, you know what, I could actually stay here and have the most awesome life and fun and all the rest of it, career for the rest of my life. But have I got something else I've got to prove to myself? And so I actually at that point chose to go, I need to move into an entirely different industry outside of media entertainment to almost prove to myself that I can do this elsewhere. Otherwise, I'm going to keep having fun and all the rest of it, but I'm not going to prove that I can do this elsewhere. And so that was one time for me. And then the second time was diving in and actually going, you know what, I'm going to own something and do something, you know, albeit in a partnership style for myself, because I've always enjoyed working for large organizations. I have always enjoyed the comfort of the infrastructure and the systems and the people and the having had 400 staff and all this kind of biz. But then sort of going, you know what, I'm going to take the step of just saying I'm at a point in my life where I've been through lots of mergers and acquisitions and I've driven a lot of that kind of stuff, but I actually need to have total responsibility for what's going on, and I'm going to give it a red hot go. That for me was something that was a huge thing to do, but yeah, I've really enjoyed the process, albeit, yeah, it's full on.
And in each of those cases, Kristie, did that involve a shift to different organisations, or was it often a change of role within the same organisation? How did that manifest?
No, I've literally changed where I've worked,
yeah,
and I've purposefully made the change for the reason that I've gone, I need to challenge myself in an entirely different environment.
Yeah, right. So, Adam, I suppose that sets one up for you then in terms of like what you've been now in the same place for 19 years. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, your journey from that perspective, from an inward perspective? Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Look, I was always maybe early in my career, like I was always promoted pretty young, so I was things were coming pretty quickly early in my career, so I wasn't thinking about this stuff very much, and I wasn't the sort of person that would go in there and be pushing to get promoted or be pushing for a salary increase. I don't think I've ever negotiated a salary increase with a boss before I ever started Quantium, as an example. I never pushed to say I deserve more money or anything like that. It just wasn't like that, and I was pretty lucky. It was all coming pretty naturally, but there was just a moment where, you know, 1 minute I was quite happy, and then suddenly I thought, you know what, I actually should just leave. I'd been made a partner at Deloitte pretty young, and because the firm, basically I had worked at one company before Quantium, which is a fantastic business called Trowbridge. It was an actuarial consulting firm, and it got bought by Deloitte, and just one day decided, you know what, I think we should do this as a business. So I think 6 weeks later started Quantium. And it was kind of a terrible time in my life in some ways. My wife was 8 months pregnant. We just bought a house. So I wasn't very popular when I came into my wife and said, I'm going to leave. I'm going to throw in this partnership that I wasn't like I ever sought the partnership, and I'm going to start Quantium. So that was one big moment, but that was just on gut feel. You know what, this feels like an opportunity. Let's just go and do it. So that was literally 6 weeks from idea to leaving and throwing it in and starting. Within Quantium, I think there's probably been different moments where you step change. It's hard to kind of look back, to be honest, and say, I remember that moment, it was this and this. I remember little things like, I remember when Woolies invested in our business the first time, they said, right, you guys need to switch to having one CEO. You've got three of you kind of running the company. You need to have one CEO. And you know, we debated that for a bit, and we didn't jump to that point. It was the first time we thought, okay, we're going to need to start having clearer leadership of the company. And I guess in some ways it's been about at what point, the hardest bit about building a company that grows quickly is in thinking, when do you need to invest in new levels of leadership? And when you say, you know what, we actually need a new level to come in, which has got that extra experience of running a team of 100 people, not just 20 people, and so on. And so often for me, that's at the same time, I need to step up in terms of how I then manage teams to have even more leadership. And we're going through that at the moment, actually. We're just bringing a few very senior people under me, which then gives me more leverage and kind of gives more responsibility and empowerment to other people. But kind of a constantly evolving thing, Eric.
How do you register those moments of change? Like, is it that you're walking in the corridors and some things aren't quite right, or is it an investor tells you something, or how do you sort of register it? Or what's bit
of everything. Like, I think if you start getting frustrated too much with something that you're thinking you're getting involved in things too much, then that's probably one problem. I think I'm very fortunate that I've got a board and some board members that give me a lot of advice as well, and I can rely on, and they start saying, look, I think you need more talent in this area, and so that's very helpful as well. Yeah, you listen to feedback from the team, and I think then you start seeing it when you see someone and you think, wow, they're doing an amazing job because they're at a certain level. We need to invest in someone over there at the same level to do the same thing. You learn, and I think you just got to be constantly open to learning and evolving how you lead, particularly in a growing company. In a growing company, it's if you don't, which was up. And so if you read about, say, the Amazon story, they were quite ruthless in how quickly they would turn over management as they were growing. It was almost like they actually didn't care about the people that worked there. Jeff Bezos would just be ruthlessly change a team. No, I've never been like that at Quantium, I wouldn't say, but you can't really criticize where Amazon's got to, but there's an example where they've had to go through that enormously.
Kristie, one of the set of questions that we had coming in, I know you will have seen this, was also a little bit about, well, let me read the questions and get your thoughts. Do you have any tips on how to stop the noise in your head to encounter and overcome challenges of hardship? And as a successful and very busy businesswoman and leader, how do you switch off sometimes? I think that's the question that we're all asking ourselves in hardcore lockdown, and for all the kind of incoming. But can you say a little bit about this in terms of, yes, managing others is one thing, but also sort of managing self?
Yeah, I think my internet connection's a bit stable, so I think unstable. So I think I picked up most of what you just said about how do you deal with all the noise in your head. And I think it's interesting because Adam a minute ago was talking about, mentioning about his wife and times to do things and whatever. I think, yes, having lots of support around you in the professional environment is important, but having lots of personal support is really important. And I think that's regardless of what sort of stage of your career you're at. And it doesn't have to be a husband or a wife. It can be a parent, a friend, whoever it is. It can be a mentor. And I think having people in your life to talk to about how you're feeling, where you're at, bouncing things off. Sometimes they only ever give you the answer you want to hear because they just love you. But sometimes having people that you can be honest about going, I'm just not sure where I'm at. I'm having a bad day. I'm struggling. You know what? The world hates me today. All those things. I think that's equally as important as having, professional support, and probably never more so than in an environment we're in now, because right now, if you've got staff issues with customers or whatever, you can't even get in people's face in the flesh and say, let's just thrash this out. You've got to deliver news on video cons, you've got to pick up the phone, or you've got to send emails. And that's kind of never really ideal. And so sometimes actually you can really get in your head more so now than ever, I think, about where you're at, how you're feeling, have you dealt with something in the right way? And just having people that genuinely care about you that you can talk that out with, I think is really important.
Adam, any secret tips you've got in terms of the kind of reset and refresh habits that you've got into?
I'm horrible at work-life balance. I don't know about you, Adam, but you've got to keep trying.
I'm actually pretty bloody good at it, actually. In the sense that I think I'm just a 24/7 person, right? So I'm constantly doing stuff. I don't really ever sit down and do nothing. My wife would probably argue very, very opposite, but that's because I'm doing something that I care about, what she wants me to do at the time. But I feel like I'm very lucky in that I've got a huge amount of interest outside of work. So even though work is something that's very important to me and I enjoy my work and it's stimulating, all that sort of stuff, equally it's not my center of my world. I'm passionate about my family. I've got two teenage kids, an 18-year-old, 16-year-old. We go, I've always gone on holidays. Like every year I've gone on at least 4 weeks travel every single year, and obviously this year's been tougher, but that's never been a problem for me of getting away from work to go on a holiday. So I love skiing, I love travel, I love sport, I love mates. I've basically got a group of mates I go to the pub with pretty much every Saturday and watch horse racing all day and watch football all day. So I'm constantly doing stuff that keeps me interested. And so work's some of it, and I'm almost on work 24/7. If someone needs to talk to me on a Sunday afternoon, as long as it's not during a Bulldogs game, then that's fine. But equally, I'll exercise every day as well. I don't let work get in the way of that. And if I play touch football, I would never miss a game of touch football because I had to do a work meeting at night. Unless I was traveling overseas or something like that. Yeah. So I think that, and to me, that's the balance of being happy in life. Is I kind of keep all that balance with friends and social life and family and work. I just kind of try and do it all.
I'm not sure how you do it, Adam, but I know that to do that, and that's the kind of life I lead, I actually have to schedule that time like you schedule a meeting. So, if I'm doing things I enjoy or I am planning a holiday, you've got to put it in the diary and go, you know what, it's in the diary, it's happening. And otherwise I get my famous saying from my hubby is, you get to a Sunday afternoon and like he's all chilled out and he'll go, can you just be? Like, can you stop? And it's interesting because it frustrates you, like when you're one of these people that, it really are enthused about being up and out and doing things. But you do have to be mindful of, treating what you need at a personal level in the same way as other things you schedule. And I think put them in the diary.
Yeah, and I think having supportive people around you as well, like, obviously having a supportive partner or family, but like I've got an assistant at work and she, we've worked together for over 20 years. And so she just knows that, as an example, if my favorite football team is playing on a Thursday night, she knows not to schedule a work thing on that Thursday night, because she would look at the start of the season and put all the games in the diary because she knows that's important to me, or she knows if she sees touch football in my diary to not put something in there. So again, all of that's the same thing. It's about protecting the things that you really find valuable to your own sense of kind of having fun in life as well.
Yeah. Scheduling those all important hairdos that you can't get done at the moment, that right now you keep rescheduling for the 1st of October and the 18th, and you just cross your fingers that eventually it's going to happen.
less of a concern for me than you, Kristie, probably. But
and before we go to the last one, I feel like I have to ask this question now because you've set it up. But this one of the people who's obviously done their homework dialing in said, using your analytics background, can you predict how the Bulldogs will go next year with their new recruits? I guess this is something you must be talking about.
Well, they can't get worse. They can't get worse. They came last on the ladder this year, but they can't get worse. So I'm very passionate about Bulldogs. I got indoctrinated when I was a young kid. So I'm very good friends with the CEO and the board and so on. So what I can say is they're doing a lot of great work off the field. So all of that will then follow on the field, but it takes a little bit of time. But I've got a lot of friends there and they're doing great work. So they can't go worse than this year.
So maybe just getting onto the final bit of the chat today, and it's really thinking about people who are, potentially on the call and thinking about, they've enjoyed what they've heard, that they're thinking about getting into data analytics, and, obviously, you've indicated that there is a bit of a talent opportunity here. There are sort of more positions than there are people, and some people may have kind of come through undergrad, 18, 19, 20, who've done actuarial sciences or they've done economics, people don't always start in the places they end up. Can you share a little bit about the kind of, how do you get into this space? Like, where do you start? What are the kind of steps into this?
Make connections out of days like this. I actually recently went along and assisted with a university executive mentoring session, met a young lady. She did a follow-up. She was one of those people that was bold, said, I really want to work in your space. Did the follow-up. We had jobs coming up. And she ended up on the top of the pile and probably shouldn't have otherwise. I think a lot of jobs right now, they're not advertised. There's also a lot of jobs advertised that aren't real, and building out your network, having conversations and having good connections, I think is really important, and not being afraid to, ask people for advice or for referrals into organizations in which you might want to work, because so often, leaders are so busy. They're like, who do we know? Who do we know? Who do we know? Or you can't fill something and people go, who do you all know? So often that is the way that you're finding the right people, as opposed to just screening applicants blindly from job advertisements.
Mm. Yeah, I think, to be honest, I actually feel a little bit out of touch on answering this question in terms of our own recruitment process. But I know, say, for example, at graduate level, I think we hired something like 100 graduates for next year. So we've hired 100 graduates for next year, and we've hired maybe 20 or 30 or 40. Some are intern students or interns, I guess, to come in and work over summer, which often leads to work the following year. So for those programs, I know, we do a lot of on-campus stuff. Maybe it's virtually these days, but there's all sorts of different programs that we run at different universities. So, if you're at Macquarie and you're interested in those sorts of things, whether it's Quantium or whether it's a range of other employers, those things are there, whether they're on Grad Connection or in other programs. And so it's just a case of applying and understanding those companies when you apply and doing your best. I would say that making sure you're working hard at uni and getting good uni results and kind of rounding out your CV and so on is important. I think then once you've started your career, again, I think it's a case of, as Kristie said, just finding those opportunities, looking out for jobs, finding people that you know, and then you might be able to learn stuff from, because it's tougher for companies to hire laterally people with experience. That's where it gets really difficult. We can hire graduates pretty well, actually. There's a lot of good graduates coming out, but to hire someone with 3-4 years experience is really hard.
Why is
there
that?
are definitely opportunities out there.
Why is the lateral a hire difficult?
Look, a few reasons, Eric. Because often the good people don't want to move. So you've got to be careful, because if someone's really, really good in their third year of work, then chances are they're being looked after very well by their current employer, and so they won't want to move. So sometimes the people that are moving are ones that you don't know whether it's them moving or them being moved. So that's one. So I think, and you just got to make sure people are moving for the right reasons as well. So I often, I don't encourage people to move jobs too quickly, because I feel like anyone can chase a promotion when they get it by moving jobs, but it's much better to get one when you've earned it in your current employer, whether it's Quantium or anywhere, frankly. And I think there's a lot you can learn. And so I think sometimes people move around too quickly. So we're a little bit gun shy on that as well. At least I personally am. I don't like seeing CVs where somebody's worked 18 months at a time everywhere. I generally would say, well, there's something wrong there. But equally, if someone had worked 30 years in one place, then often that different question as well. Why else is it difficult? I just think that demand for people with 3 or 4 years experience is just so high relative to maybe how many people came out of course at that time, particularly in areas like engineering. Engineering is so short. I mean, the call I was on before this call was with my head of product and technology. We were about to trial a team in the Ukraine because we just can't find people in Australia. And we settled on the Ukraine, having looked at, we've already got a team in India, looking at South Africa, the Ukraine, the Philippines, and Georgia, of all places. Like, we looked at all of these, and we've settled on a firm in the Ukraine to use engineers. That's how hard it is to find engineers locally.
I was going to ask, you go, Kristie.
I was going to pick up on the point Adam made about it's really important that you do well at your studies and whatnot. Fully agree. But I think it's also equally important that people can frame up the other experience they've had around their university study. So I think it's interesting, because a lot of people will graduate and they'll go, I haven't got any experience, but I've got a degree, or that's what their head is telling them. But actually the part-time job that they've had in retail or fast food or whatever it is, there's core skills you develop through those, jobs that are really important and do translate into your first, let's call it, professional or career role. So understanding, operational process, understanding the way technology works in business, being somebody who's accustomed to being on the front line with a customer, being able to talk to people, dealing with conflict, dealing with customer service issues, they are all absolutely translatable skills. So I think being able to, when you're getting into those first jobs, draw conclusions between some of the part-time or other things you might have done along the way, or even some of your interests that sit alongside, what are your academic results and the areas you've studied. I think that is also something really important that everybody thinks through and can tease out in their sort of CV or their LinkedIn profile, their cover letter, and in the conversations they're having.
100%. Like my son, my 18-year-old's working at a pub, and I reckon there's no better job to learn a lot of those skills than working at a pub and having to, refuse service to drunk adults and so on in pubs, and deal with all of the different things that go on there, to learn life skills that will then equip you to be able to deal with a manager and manage people and all those sorts of things in work life. I 100% agree.
I mean, they deal with end of night, cashing out, point of sale. Like, you don't think about it, but that's all part of it.
Yeah, and maybe just as a final question on that, just zooming out a little bit. I mean, obviously the whole country's looking forward to opening the borders at some point, and we'll be able to move. I mean, do you think that where we're going to find jobs is going to be changed in some fundamental way here? I mean, Adam, you're taking your point about Ukraine. Is it that some of these jobs are permanently going to be offshore? Is it just a moment in time? Maybe just something a little bit about where to from here as as the borders open up and things remove. can you say something a bit about that trajectory?
Yeah, I think there's two things there. I think there's where are you going to employ people, and equally where are people going to want to work? So, historically we've had people who work in our office, and whereas that's obviously changed in the last 18 months, and going forward, we know there are a lot of people who want to work flexibly, and that might mean in some cases they want to work 2 or 3 days a week in the office, and there's some people who actually want to work 5 days a week remotely. And so I think that's a really interesting question for employers, as to what extent do you embrace that for some roles? And there are some roles that you probably can, and some that are more difficult. If you're in a customer facing role where you need to actually be with the client all day, well, then you can't be sitting in Byron Bay. That's not good enough for that role. But maybe if you're a software engineer, you can. And so the sort of things we're wrestling with there are, okay, if someone wants to live somewhere in Australia, it's pretty easy. But what if somebody decides that they want to go and live in Luxembourg and work from there? Well, we don't know what the employment rules and conditions are in Luxembourg, and what the tax situations are and all that sort of stuff. And so actually as an employer, it gets really difficult. But I expect that the trend of teams working more flexibly and more remotely and so on is only going to increase. And so they're just questions we're just going to need to get our head around. But at the same time, I must say, I do think there's also something really valuable in teams being able to come together in person and to be able to have those conversations in the corridor, go and grab lunch together and all of those sorts of things. Those connections mean a lot, and they're really valuable to you in a career. So even though you might have to commute to go into work and it feels like a hassle, I personally think there's still a huge amount of value in teams coming together.
Oh, and from a learning and development point of view, I just think that it's going to be so much harder for young people coming into certain professions just to pick up some more of, the information and the details and the skills that otherwise you would get when you're just rubbing, or running projects together, or, putting up your hand and volunteering and saying, I'll join that, or just hearing what goes on in the corridor. Like you said, it's a whole different, way in which you've got to learn now, and a whole different way in which leaders have got to onboard people, which is actually quite challenging.
Well, Adam and Kristie, I think we've come to full time. I just want to thank you as both Macquarie alumni and as people who've just gone on to incredible things. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom for the last hour to students. It's really fantastic. You're welcome back anytime, and hopefully we will be able to reconvene one day. For those of you who've joined in, we're going to have a number of other different sessions. We've got one of our students who's just come back from the Paralympics, Amy Ridley, a couple of others who are lined up for a bit later this year. So please be safe, keep well, stay tuned into the Dean's Lecture Series. And Adam and Kristie, thank you so much for your time today.
No worries, thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.